I was a 6-year-old. I was a fast runner. I liked hurdling and so on. And suddenly you can't run, you can't walk, and it's almost seems overnight. Woke up one morning and I couldn't move my right leg. And it progressed from there to the point where I was just completely helpless. I couldn't lift my head. It is a form of spinal cord injury in the end, but it's not done by trauma, but by this virus. And so depending where it attacks the spine, it depends on where you were weak. In my case, it was fairly low down, so it was my legs that were affected, and they were both paralysed. And because it was a virus, there was a lot of fear. And so we were sent off to Fairfield Infectious Diseases Hospital to be kept out of the way. In my case, it was a very traumatic experience. I still remember it because I was at home in bed, and two guys in white coats just came in and carried me out, screaming, out into the night, into an ambulance, and I woke up in a ward. And in those days, the theory was you didn't worry kids, you didn't tell them what was happening, so nobody told me that was going to happen. And once you were there, you were isolated, out of sight, out of mind, and they discouraged parents from visiting because they said it only upsets the children, and so it was a form of imprisonment. And it went to the point that my dad went to the local solicitor and got a writ of habeas corpus and was able to spring me out of there, so I was able to go home. And one thing they did in those days was they strapped you into a Thomas splint, and so you were on your back, arms and legs strapped down in order to try and avoid contractures, muscles contracting in the wrong way. I rebelled against that, and I exercised myself, my upper body, and eventually I got good upper body strength back again. It affected everybody differently. Some kids didn't survive. Some finished up in an iron lung. Luckily, I never needed that. I was always able to breathe. But it finished up that I had 2 paralysed legs and a contracted hip muscle, so I couldn't stand up. First I went to the Urella School for Crippled Children, and I went there in a bus to and fro with School for Crippled Children on the side, so we're very clearly identified as crippled children. And they gave me a really good education, I have to say. The teaching was terrific. At age 12 I went to normal school, and I was able to fit in completely because I was up to speed academically. I studied law at Melbourne Uni. I did a combined law arts course. I majored in French. I went for the postgrad, and that eventually resulted in getting a French government scholarship to do a doctorate in Paris. So I had 5 years in Paris, which is very good. Disability is not the end of the world, as long as you get the right help, because you can still have a full life. Physical accessibility is a large part of it. Whenever there's a step, that's a barrier to somebody in a wheelchair. And even a 6-inch step that most of us would just unconsciously step over means that the person in the wheelchair can't go inside. With the house layout, there's a sunken floor, and to get from one side of the room to the other and to get into the bathroom, I have to get out of the wheelchair and onto the floor, and then crawl into the bathroom. It's the only way that I can access it, because there's a step because of the sunken room, and the wheelchair won't go in. That could be fixed with a home modification, and as I understand it, under the NDIS that would be possible, whereas the aged care system simply isn't funded for that sort of thing. And so that is a good example where disability is a thing in itself and has separate requirements from what aged care can provide. solution is actually very simple. It's one section of the NDIS Act which causes the problem, one sentence really, which imposes the ban on people over 65 accessing the NDIS, and that could be fixed today. You'd simply delete it, and the problem would be solved. So the problem is not one of difficulty; it's a problem of political bastardry, I'd say. What a lot of politicians don't understand is that disability and age are two different things. Like, I have the same disability now I did when I was 6, that never changed. It didn't go away when I turned 65. Disability very often involves the need for equipment to get around. It involves various support. It's something in itself that needs adjustment and needs certain resources for, whereas ageing in itself is not a disability. It's simply, it might be that people slow down a bit, or that there are certain things they can't do, but by and large, they don't need like special equipment and so on. With a disability, it often involves equipment every now and then, not all the time. It's what they call lumpy expenditure. Every now and then there's a big item that someone has to have. And the same with home modifications. There are things, for example, that the NDIS can do, but aged care simply can't do. It simply doesn't have the funding for. What should be accepted is that disability is across the board. It can't be sequestered into one age group. It's not a matter of age or race or sex or religion. It affects everybody across the spectrum. And so policy directed towards disability should be directed across the board too. It shouldn't be excluding people or throwing some people under the bus. There are some aspects that have got nothing to do with your disability. And in that case, I think people should be treated normally and given the same sort of service as a person without a disability would have. In other words, not to get too hung up on the fact of a disability. And I think, in my experience, most medicos are good that way, but there are some who seem to feel that because you've had polio, that you're somehow in a different category, or perhaps not so important. It's often no good just asking people, do they need help? Because they might say no. They won't want to appear self-reliant. So in some cases, it needs to be a bit more proactive, just to see what people really do need, or what sort of situation they really are in. Because I think others have found it's quite frustrating. They want to help, but the people won't come forward and say what they need. So that is one of the things that perhaps professionals might look at. And I think the problem sometimes in the medical sphere is that people assume that a disabled person has a lesser quality of life. In other words, they don't value life as much as another person would. But I can assure you it's not the case at all. We all have the same hopes and dreams and fears. We're all people in the end, and it doesn't matter whether one is disabled or not in that respect. We all have the same value. The actual consequences are for life. You don't have it and then get over it. You've got it, and you have to just adapt accordingly. And so my disability is exactly the same now as it was when I was 6 years old. And that's why I think if there is a resurgence of polio, I think people should be very, very vigilant, and they should definitely, since there are vaccines, they should definitely take those, do everything they can to prevent their kids having affected by it, because it will affect them for their life.